So I think it was the last day of shooting for Life of Brian in Tunisia, and there was a party, and I remember sitting talking to Terry, and Terry talking about his future projects, and he went through the story of Brazil, which sounded amazing. After Time Bandits, I'd written some comedy for the BBC, and Terry came to me to discuss Brazil. There was already a script which Terry had put together with Charles Alverson, with whom he'd written Jabberwocky, but he wasn't happy with that. We spent, I think, about 6 weeks going over the script of Brazil, just throwing ideas about. After that, I didn't hear anything for, I don't know, 6 months or a year. And then I heard that Tom Stoppard was going to write the script.
Terry had written a script of Brazil, and it was fairly complete as far as he was concerned, but they were all pages without any dialogue on them. They were wonderfully inventive descriptions of Sam's dreams and so on. They were beautiful to read and astonishing. But I suppose, I never asked him, but I suppose he felt that the story needed some more narrative structure or a more interesting structure, and also, above all, some humor. I mean, there is humor in Terry's visual concepts, but he felt that the story should be more humorous, more of a comedy in the conventional sense. Our working relationship is easily described. I refused to work his way. His way would have been to meet every day, or at least talk every day, and meet every other day, and discuss what had been written overnight. And he wanted to be in there with his sleeves rolled up, and I said, well, that's fine, but I really couldn't work like that. He'd have to trust me to some extent, tell me exactly what the brief was and what he felt about it, and we'd talk together. But there was a point where I had to go away.
Tom went away and wrote the script and came back with something which wasn't altogether Terry's script. It was as if, I think, Terry's baby had been taken away from him. And I think that would have been the case whoever had written the script at that point.
Tom did sort the pieces of the puzzle out a lot. I mean, he simplified things. He put through lines that weren't there. I think one of his great contributions is the Buttle-Tuttle confusion, because before there were 2 arrests, and there was a confusion, but it wasn't this very simple, neat Buttle-Tuttle, 1 letter.
I wanted the whole thing to be the result of a mistake, that a machine had gone wrong because a beetle fell into the working parts of the machine, and a person's entire life was then changed, or in fact, ended.
And Tom immediately got to grips with this pile of material, started shaping it really nicely. But then there would be areas where I just didn't agree with what he was doing. I didn't get it.
Terry wasn't principally interested in verbal humor, or indeed in words. I really don't believe he's that interested in dialogue as a craft.
He was too intellectual or too clever as opposed to emotional.
Sometimes he wouldn't understand a joke, perhaps. There's a line somewhere in the film where Jonathan Pryce meets Michael Palin somewhere, and he says, "Hello, how are the twins?" Palin says, "Triplets," and Sam says, "Oh, how time flies."
How time flies.
Terry was completely bewildered by this, and also I was completely incapable of explaining why it was a joke at all. And there's a scene where the mother is having plastic surgery of some kind. Halfway through the process, one sees her looking, quite repellent, and the doctor is saying, "There you are, already she's twice as beautiful as before," and the son looks at her and says, "My God, it works." Terry had difficulty understanding, and in fact, I think he cut that out, and then later he got it and tried to put it back, and perhaps succeeded in putting it back.
And already she's twice as beautiful as she was before. Voila!
My God, it works.
And I kept saying to him, the thing is about Brazil, Terry, is that it's very hard to make it fresh. And he'd look rather bewildered, and I'd say, well, this Orwellian thing, and he'd kind of deflect all this. It seemed to me a reworking of Orwell's 1984, which itself had been redone, recooked, and rebaked, and regrilled, and refried by 100 people. And he didn't really respond to this. And later it turned out that he said, you know, the thing is, I never wanted to tell you, but I never read 1984, and I never saw any movie of 1984, so I didn't really know what you were talking about.
And we worked, Tom was commissioned for 3 drafts, and he did, you know, absolutely fantastic work. But I thought in certain areas, some of the characters, in particular, Mike Palin's character, was wrong. He was making him a bastard from the word go, rather than the nicest man in the world who just happens to be a torturer, who just happens to do this job.
Terry decided he wasn't happy with the script which Tom Stoppard had provided. And my function, I think, was in some ways to sort of reintroduce Terry to his own material. So we sat for, I think Terry thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, it ended up being 6 weeks, and just went through it.
And I started using Charles as a sounding board. We started talking about what was right and what was wrong, what he thought was right. And little by little, it became more of a writing relationship. And so Charles was brought in and rewrote, you know, several scenes.
I signed the contract waiving my right to a credit. At that stage, it was going to be Stoppard's script. And I was just being employed to kind of do bits of fiddling around the edges. I remember at some point in the course of filming, I was on set, and somebody approached me and asked me if I would be interviewed as a writer. And I thought, well, I'm not officially supposed to exist as a writer. So I went to Terry and said, look, I'm being asked to do an interview. What do you know about that? And he said, oh, yes, I want you to have a credit. You've done X amount on it, and it's not fair that you don't. He'd spoken to Stoppard about that, and they generously agreed to give me a credit.
I'd have to go back to all the scripts to find out who did what where, because by the end of it, it's, you know, the 3 of us did this stuff.
It was just amazing to be servicing, as it were, as a writer, this story which was unfolding, which was full of very exciting contradictions in some way, as well as, you know, there being a strong story going through it. It was full of kind of, Terry was, I think, resisting ironing the thing out. It could have been a simpler story. It could have been more logical in some ways, but it would have been much poorer as a result. And I think one of the kind of things he was in the process of doing was maintaining richness of texture and resisting the temptation to clarify, which would have possibly produced a less interesting result.
It was a very greedy script. It was almost 2 films. There was, you know, the real world, as bizarre as that is, and the fantasy world. There were almost 2 tales being told, and trying to blend these things. And it was really, in some cases, a product of shooting and realizing that, in that one scene in the so-called real world, we've achieved what we were trying to achieve in that next fantasy sequence, so throw it out. And that's what happened. I'm pretty ruthless with the things that I love most. Ask my family. There's something about the things, because I've worked them out and they're all in my head, I've almost done it. And sometimes it's easier to jettison those things because they're probably better in my head than what I'm going to get on film.
Or to my mind, one of the things about it is that it involves us. It's not a film from which you can escape, that, you know, we're all culpable, as Sam is culpable.
Doesn't it bother you, the sort of things you do in information retrieval?
What? Suppose you'd rather have terrorists.
He's the man who lives and ignores the terrible things that are happening around him, and who is, ironically, forced to confront what's happening around him by falling in love.
I'm looking for a girl with blonde hair. She's medium height, green eyes.
And the act of falling in love, in the course of which he's reborn, is what, paradoxically, sort of kills him.
I don't know whether Terry has what you'd call a political philosophy. Probably like most of us, he wouldn't think of it as that. It's common man's morality that there comes a point where you may well have to reply violently to violence.
You okay? Tuttle! Call me Harry.
It's not a pacifist film, but I suspect that it wasn't made in order to make any universal point. I don't think it was a film made to propose a thesis about violence and morality. I think it was more to do with just a gut fear against the way the future was going and a comic defense against it through trying to show up its absurdity.
RB stroke CZ stroke 907 stroke X. Sign here, please.
It was a visceral script. At that stage, I think you might have found Terry's intestines in his head or his brains in his guts. And that was what made the film so remarkable.